Hi, thanks for joining us today. My name is Steve Grossenbacher, Director of Product Marketing at Zscaler. So we're here to talk about CASB and specifically how you can integrate CASB into your data protection platform. We all know that CASB is a pretty hot technology and there's a lot of questions out there. So what we're going to do is spend some time talking about what problems CASB solves and what you should be thinking about if you're looking to integrate CASB into your organization. Joining me today are two of my speakers. The first one is Moinul Khan, VP of Product Management. Moinul, can you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Steve. Hi, my name is Moinul Khan. I'm VP of Products here at Zscaler, responsible for Zscaler's overall data protection strategy. That includes data loss prevention, CASB, and cloud security posture management.
And also joining us is our CISO, Mark Lewick. Mark, can you introduce yourself?
Of course. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, my name is Mark Lewick. I'm the CISO. I focus on Northern Europe. I'm here in the UK, and I work closely with our customers and also for our internal data protection practices.
Thanks for joining us, Mark. So let's get started with a fundamental question, right? How important is CASB to securing your cloud apps? If you think about cloud apps, they're great for business. They really increase productivity and collaboration, but you have to put your sensitive data into those cloud apps, which means that your data is increasingly distributed. You're losing control over it. So how does CASB help you from a security perspective in securing this data?
Well, Steve, I think it's a really good question, but you gave part of the answer in your question. Cloud apps, we moved to cloud apps. We didn't invent them. They're not something new. The applications are simply ways of conducting the business we've always done. They're just at a different place. And just like the applications are just new locations for data, CASB actually isn't really a new control either. It's actually a way of governing our use of applications. The applications just no longer live in our data center. And I think that our ability to see inside of these applications and moderate what our employees and members and so forth do is a function that we've always had. And what I find really interesting is that we may have actually had a sense of trust before we had CASB in these applications when they are inside that maybe wasn't merited.
Yeah, I think that makes sense if you think of CASB as just an evolution of security controls, but in a different place. Mono, your perspective.
CASB is all about SaaS security. Before I answer that question, Steve, let me step back and let's talk about SaaS applications. Why people are using SaaS applications. IT, they love these apps because it's easy to deploy. There are no ongoing management and maintenance. From end user perspective, they love SaaS applications because these applications make them productive. They can access them from anywhere. These applications are very collaborative. So when all these applications are in play, they're being utilized. As an IT, you need a CASB, Cloud Access Security Brokers, to gain deeper visibility and govern very granular policies to control users' behavior so that your enterprise, your data, your devices, and your users are always secure.
So let's talk about where CASB fits into the larger scheme of security. We all know that Secure Web Gateway kind of sits in the same area as far as making sure that you can control traffic and making sure you control how users access apps and websites. Is there a convergence between Secure Web Gateway and CASB, or are they separate?
It's an interesting question, Steve. More and more, the difference between an unsanctioned SaaS applications and a random web application is blurring. I often ask our customers a question, and that is, what is Pandora to you? Some will say that it's a SaaS-based application because they have subscription to it, and others will say, no, it's a random web applications because I don't really upload any of my sensitive data to it. At the end of the day, CASB is not a product. CASB is rather a bunch of features that should be part of your web security gateway. Your web security gateway sees all your egress internet traffic, and it should be able to secure all applications from external threats, from insider threats, data exfiltration, accidental data loss, regardless if the user is using a SaaS applications or a web application.
Yeah, Bueno, that's a really good answer, but I think actually in order to answer that even in more depth, we need to go backwards. And that is what security used to be back in the day when I started. I mean, the whole game of security was find the traffic and apply the controls, find your sensitive data and apply the controls. It turned security into a giant game of whack-a-mole as you try to find out where that traffic was and apply those controls. And of course, the employees were trying the exact opposite because they were trying to avoid those controls. And that was dissatisfying. And actually, it was a bit of an afterthought. And the architecture now can be fully turned on its head. Instead of going and finding that traffic and finding that data, why don't we send our traffic to the controls? And what happens when you flip your architecture on its head like that is suddenly you're able to start naturally growing controls in a common location. And picking up Moino's point, you can have a platform that can grow with these extensions. So that first control area that made sense by flipping the architecture on its head was SWG. And CASB, now that we've got that traffic going through a platform, being inspected, being seen in one location, CASB becomes a logical next step and conclusion to what you're going to be doing with that data. So actually, SWG and CASB aren't opposing, aren't different. They're simply a logical extension of a new security architecture.
The last thing I think we should talk about is the common use cases for CASB. So Mark, when you talk to organizations, what are the most common problems they're trying to solve when they reach out to you about CASB?
Yeah, sure, Steve. I think it starts from the simple and it can get far more complex. Let's start from that simple end. And that is that CASB can be used to control what people do in unsanctioned apps. It's not good enough now to simply say you can access that and you can't access that. You need a more granular set of controls. What can you do with these apps? When can you do it with these apps? And then that, of course, pushes further into the threat protection angle. These SaaS apps have become a reservoir for potential threats. And being able to have your same set of security controls that are protecting the estate from malware, from ransomware and other things, being able to be active in that environment, that's a logical conclusion. So that use case of being able to extend those controls and say, here's what people can access and can't access, and here's a suite of services to ensure that it's safe, that's a pretty simple use case. But it can become a little more complex. Because what we had when we were governing these applications in our data centers is again, a fairly simple process, but we trusted it because it was inside of our data centers. Now what we're able to do, because the traffic is flowing through the controls, we're able to leverage more. We can actually look at the data that you're using within an application. I challenge you to look at an old estate in an old application and be able to say, well, you can use that data, but you can't use that data. It didn't really work. So now the more complex use case is adding in convergence of DLP and CASB and saying, this application, you can use that kind of data, and this sort of application, you can't use that sort of data, or even change that and say these users can use that data and these ones can't. That's a really a far more complex use, and it's a lot more maturity required to deliver that kind of value, but it is absolutely along the progression towards where we need to be from controlling and governing these applications.
Moinal, from your perspective, can you talk us through these use cases a little bit more and how they can enable organizations to help better protect their sensitive data?
Everything starts with visibility. You need inline real-time visibility of all your users, applications, application risk. You also need out-of-band visibility for data at rest and exposure. Cloud application control comes next. Data loss prevention is one of the primary drivers for CASB deployment. Threat prevention is critical. And last but not least, don't forget about user anomalies and compliance.
So that's a perfect rundown. I appreciate you walking through that. So we're coming up on time now. So hopefully you have a good idea of some of the use cases and what you have to kind of consider if you're thinking about integrating CASB into your data protection portfolio. But before we go, I just want to get just kind of last comments. Mark, from your perspective, if you were talking to someone and they were looking at integrating CASB, what would be the one piece of advice you would give them?
I think the most important thing for me is recognizing that CASB and that extension of DLP are not ends. They're not goals. They're not outcomes. They're technologies and they're means to achieve something. And I think if you are starting down that path to ensure that you have planned what the outcome is you're trying to achieve, what it is you're trying to govern, how you're trying to govern it. Is it data sensitivity? DLP is not about leakage. It's about governing data, and to have a clear set of goals that you're aiming towards with these technologies. For me, that is the most important lesson I could tell anybody going down this and starting this journey now.
That does make sense. Moino, what would be your one piece of advice?
My recommendation is take a crawl, walk, and run approach. It's impossible to secure hundreds and thousands of applications at day one. Perhaps in the crawl mode, get the visibility, get a comprehensive shadow IT visibility, try to understand what's exactly happening within your organization. In the walk mode, put the user in monitor mode. Build some data loss prevention policy, threat prevention policy, try to see what users are uploading and downloading from these applications. Try to understand if any of your sensitive data is at risk. And in the run mode, you should first think about your corporate sanctioned SaaS application, because these are the applications that you have brought to the organization. You are directly responsible for it. Use an out-of-band CASB, scan your data, look for threats, look for DLP violations, find out if there are any exposure to your sensitive data. Inline, in forward proxy mode, try to block any risky applications that are in play. Also build some inline DLP policies, threat prevention policy, to make sure your users are not uploading sensitive data to unsanctioned SaaS apps.
That's going to do it for us. We'd like to thank Mark and Moino for joining us. And if you'd like to learn more about CASB or data protection, jump on over to zscaler.com/DP, where we've got a ton of great content that you can read, along with a way for you to reach out and talk to one of our experts. Thanks a lot.